Good morning and welcome to story time. Miss Melissa has gone on a short little vacation, so I'm going to do my best to tell you some fun stories. Um, because I didn't think ahead, I didn't get any picture books, so we're going to read a sort of chapter, sort of picture book, but I think you'll find it delightful, and I will show you all the pictures that there are. So I'm going to read as much of this as we can for this week, and then we'll see where we're at the end of this. So today we're going to read The Giggler Treatment. That's what the cover looks like. Chapter 1. Mr. Mack was walking to the train station. It was a nice sunny morning. The birds in the trees were singing their favorite songs, and the breeze that blew was full of breakfast smells: bacon, eggs, frogs' legs, and cabbage. Yum, said Mr. Mack to himself. Mr. Mack was feeling happy. Mr. Mack was feeling very happy. He had a nice lunch in his lunchbox, and a surprise in his flask, and his children's goodbye kisses were still tickling his cheeks. He was going to work, and he liked his job. Actually, Mr. Mack loved his job. He was a biscuit tester in a biscuit factory. Warning! You think you know what biscuits are? They are those things that you put butter on, the breakfasty things you get with eggs. That's what you think they are. And you're right. But not if you live in Ireland like I do. In Ireland, what you call cookies, we call biscuits. Mr. Mack is a biscuit tester. But if he lived where you live, it is cookies he'd be testing. Later on in the book, the word plaster is used. A plaster in Ireland is a Band-Aid in America. This is very useful information. Think about it. You might be in Ireland someday, and you might run into a shop, that's a store, wanting to shout, "Quick, quick, my cookie is bleeding. Give me a Band-Aid." But now that you're reading this book, you know that you should shout, "Quick, quick, my biscuit is bleeding. Give me a plaster." Then you will be understood. But remember to say please. If there are any other words that aren't familiar, they are probably explained in the glossary at the back of the book. While we're here, I'd like to assure you that there are no dinosaurs in this book. Not a purple one or a singing one. None. I was tempted to put in a dinosaur in a leather jacket who bullies old people, but my grandmother wouldn't lend me her leather jacket. So relax. There are no dinosaurs. Now, back to Mr. Mack and the story. The return of Chapter 1. So, Mr. Mack loved his job. It was his job to make sure that the biscuits had the right amount of chocolate, if they were supposed to have chocolate, and he measured them to make sure they were exactly square if they were supposed to be square, or exactly round if they were supposed to be round. Best of all, he tasted them. Not all of them. He tasted 3 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon to make sure that they tasted exactly right. He was looking forward to work because today he was going to be testing his favorite biscuits of all time, fig rolls. The factory made 365 types of biscuits, a different biscuit for every day of the year. Mr. Mack liked most of these biscuits, and he loved some of them, but fig rolls always came top of his list. He loved their shape, he loved their smell, he loved their intelligence. They were such clever biscuits. They were delicious without needing any help from chocolate, and today was fig roll testing day. So Mr. Mack was one happy man. But on his way to the station, just after he turned the corner, he saw a seagull sitting on the branch of a tree. "Do you know what, mister?" said the seagull. "I hate fish." "I didn't know seagulls could perch in trees," said Mr. Mack. He kept walking, but he looked back to have another look at the seagull, and this was a pity. Because he didn't see the dog poo right in front of him on the footpath. Poor Mr. Mack. His shoe was heading straight for that poo. Chapter 2. So what? So what? Yes, so what? People stand on dog poo all of the time. Even dogs stand on dog poo now and again. But it was huge. It was a big pile of wet, fresh dog poo. It was probably the biggest pile of poo in the world. Big dog, big poo. So what? I'm bored. I'm going to skip a few pages and see if there's any more about biscuits. Wait! This story isn't about biscuits, and it isn't about poo. The story is about the people who put the poo on the path so that Mr. Mack would stand on it. The people who put it there? It was dog poo, so it came out of a dog, right? Right. So a dog stopped on the path outside the train station. He stayed there for a little while and left the poo before he ran away, right? Wrong. It was dog poo, but it wasn't a dog that put it there. And this story is about the little people who did put it there, just 10 seconds before Mr. Mack turned the corner. Chapter 3. 4 steps, 3 steps, 2 steps. Mr. Mack had seen enough of the seagull. He was going to turn around in plenty of time to see the poo. But the seagull spoke again. "Fish," said the seagull. "Don't talk to me about fish." 4 steps, 3 steps, 2 steps, 1. Mr. Mack's left foot was right over the dog stuff. The bottom of his shoe was exactly 16.5 inches from the peak of And Mr. Mack thought he heard giggles. And he was right. He had heard giggles. Like these. Giggle, giggle, giggle. The poo was in the middle of the path. The path was beside a garden wall. And the gigglers were on the other side of the wall, hidden behind it. There were 3 of them. They were all standing on the crossbar of a rusty old bike that had been leaning against the wall for more than 20 years. The bike was so old it had almost become part of the wall. The gigglers had watched Mr. Mack as he got nearer to the poo. They had counted the steps. How many? 4. How many now? 3. How many now? 2. They heard the seagull talking to Mr. Mack, and they ducked behind the wall as Mr. Mack walked right up to the poo. How many now? 1. They waited. A chapter that isn't really a chapter because nothing really happens in it, but we'll call it chapter 4. Nothing happens in this chapter, but some of the questions that are probably hopping about in your heads get answered, like this one. Why? Why what? Why did the gigglers put the poo on the path? Good question. They did it because of something Mr. Mack had done the night before he was walking to the train station. But I'll tell you all about it later, because these chapters where nothing happens get boring very quickly. Now, back to the story. You see the giggler? He's so cute. Chapter 5, which should probably be called Chapter 4, but let's just call it Chapter 5. Back at the train station, the gigglers waited. They waited for the wallop, Mr. Mack hitting the poo. They waited for the squelch, Mr. Mack stepping down on the poo. They waited for the gasp, Mr. Mack seeing the poo for the first time. They waited for the groan, Mr. Mack seeing that most of the poo was now on his shoe. His shoe was now very, very close to the you-know-what. How close? Said the smallest giggler. 14 3/4 inches, said the biggest giggler. That's very close, said the middle-sized one. And she shoved her fist into her mouth to trap her giggles. And they waited. Oh, did I miss any pictures? I did. Chapter 6, which should probably be called Chapter 5, is another one of these chapters where nothing much happens except for one very exciting thing at the end. More questions, like this one. Who are the gigglers? Good question. The gigglers look after children, and they do it very well. But they do it so quietly that hardly anybody has ever seen them. How do they look after the children? Good question. They follow them everywhere. To school, to the shops, to the park, and back home again. Upstairs, into the toilet, all over the place. Everywhere the children go, the gigglers are always near, always looking after them. What do they look like? Good question. Only a few people have ever seen the gigglers, and they never tell anyone else about them. So it's hard to tell what gigglers look like. They are baby-sized and furry. Their fur changes colors as they move. Like a chameleon? Yes, like a chameleon. If they are near a white wall, they become white. If they are in a tree, they become green and brown. If they are near a car, well, it depends on the color of the car. But they're not very good at being purple, so they try not to go too near purple cars. Why do they follow the children? Another good question. They follow the children to make sure that adults are being fair to them. Parents, teachers, aunties, shopkeepers, all adults. If they are mean to the children, they get the Giggler treatment. If they send a child to bed without their supper, or if they frighten a child, they get the Giggler treatment. If they are dishonest to a child, if, say, they give a child fish and say it's chicken, or if they ever fart and then blame the child for it, they get the Giggler treatment. If they are ever rude to a child or make them wear clothes that they hate, they get the Giggler treatment. What is the Giggler treatment? Poo on the shoe. What happens then? The adults keep getting the treatment every day, sometimes twice or 3 times a day, until they stop being mean to the child. Have the gigglers always done this? Yes, since the beginning of time. The gigglers have always been there, since the first dog did its first poo, since the first caveman grunted at his first cave child. He stomped out of the cave straight into a huge lump of prehistoric poo. The Roman Emperor Nero hated children. He ordered his guards to catch all the children and feed them to the lions. Then he stood on a dollop of lion poo. There were more lions than dogs in ancient Rome. Many years later, a saint called Patrick was busy driving all the snakes out of Ireland. A little boy called Elvis O'Leary, who loved snakes, asked Patrick to stop, but Patrick pushed him out of his way and walked straight into a little hill of hot poo that only seconds before had been inside an Irish wolfhound called Bran. St. Patrick got rid of the snakes, but he never got rid of the smell. 2 minutes after the Titanic hit the iceberg, a woman on deck shouted, "Quick, quick! The children will drown!" "Good," said a man. "There'll be more room in the lifeboats." And he stepped into a hill of the slimiest green dog poo and slid off the deck straight into the sea. "Oh, Mammy!" he roared. "I forgot me water wings." So you see, the Gigglers have been doing this work for thousands of years. All this time they've been giving the treatment to the men and women who are mean to children. How was Mr. Mack mean to his children? Good question, and the answer is coming up soon. But we'll go on to the next chapter. What about the very exciting thing at the end of this chapter? Oh, yes, I nearly forgot. While I was telling you all about the Gigglers, a woman who was walking in a park on Bombay nearly stood on a snail. That wasn't exciting. Well, the snail thought it was. Okay, that's part 1 of the Giggler treatment. Stay tuned next week to learn more about what happens to Mr. Mack and why he was mean to his children and if he gets the Giggler treatment. Hope you have a great week. Keep being involved with summer reading. Enter all your reading logs. We want to see lots of progress and we want to give out lots of prizes. So, see you next time.